Oh, I've got a very yellow back of hand. That's nice. Thanks, turmeric. Right, we're going to make my quick chickpea braise with kale and harissa. And it's, I think, a lesson in how buying a few really flavorful store-cupboard ingredients can help you make really quick, really easy, but flavor-packed dinners. So yeah, this is basically all about the chickpeas, preserved lemons, harissa, and they're going to come together to form what I think is an unreasonably delicious dinner for how long it takes and the effort you have to put in. All good things start with onions. So a little bit of olive oil, that's on a sort of medium-high heat, and I'm just going to let that heat up for a minute before our onions go in. I've stripped the kale leaves from the stalks. It's really easy to do that. You just, run your fingers down the stalk and these leaves come off. And these stalks are actually brilliant. They almost always get thrown in the bin. They are a bit more tough and sinewy than the leaves, but like with any stalks, from greens, from chard to cavolo nero, if you add these at the beginning of cooking, they will cook down and become soft, and you're not throwing them in the bin, and you're getting extra flavour out of, something that you would otherwise chuck. So the pan's nice and hot now, and I've got one red onion I've just finely sliced, and that's going to go in for about 5 minutes. I'm going to keep the heat kind of medium-high here because I'm happy for this onion to brown a bit as it softens. We want it to be soft and sweet, but I want kind of a little bit of browning and caramelization here. So one thing I always add with my onions is a pinch of salt. That kind of starts the seasoning story of the dish right from the beginning, but it also allows the kind of onion to soften, the fibres to break down a bit, and I think helps drive off the water and actually gets your onion cooked a bit quicker. So those are cooking away, and while that happens, I'm going to finish slicing my kale stalks here. The stalks on kale varies from really thin to quite thick. These are quite thick, so I'm actually going to chop them as kind of thinly as I can. So while that onion's cooking away, I'm going to talk to you about the 3-star store-cupboard ingredients I'm going to use here. The first are chickpeas. You could use chickpeas from a can if you want. If that's what you've got, if that's what you use, then that's absolutely fine. I love these chickpeas that come in a jar. These are amazing Spanish ones. They're a bit more expensive, but I always find that they're softer, they're more well cooked, and they're better seasoned. And if you're having a vegetarian meal, then you're saving money on not buying meat and fish, and you can invest a tiny bit more money in really good vegetarian staples like these. Onions are looking good, so I'm going to add the next 2 bits of flavour, kind of turn the heat down to medium. And I'm going to add my kale stalks and then my sliced garlic. I've got about 2 cloves, 2 nice big cloves of garlic sliced here. And we just want to cook off the garlic for a couple of minutes so that it loses its rawness and starts to sort of crisp at the edges. So next, some spice. We're going to add some turmeric, about a heaped teaspoon. And this is going to be, a kind of hit of flavour that's going to go all the way through the dish. Turmeric's actually one of the most used spices in my kitchen. I feel like it crosses lots of different cuisines, and it's a really good one to have if you've only got a few spices in your cupboard. So the next thing we're going to add is some preserved lemon. Now, preserved lemon is basically a lemon that's been preserved in salt, which eventually sort of turns into a salty brine. Most people just use the skin of the preserved lemon, which is what I'm going to do today. This middle part actually gets quite bitter because it's where, the pips have been sitting. I'm just going to roughly slice the kind of outside of the lemon, and that's going to go into the pan. So I'm just adding 1 jar. If you're using tins, you would want to add 2 tins. And I'm adding all of the liquid as well. So whether you're using jarred or whether you're using tinned, that liquid is what the chickpeas have been sitting in. It could well have been, it is with these jars what it's cooked in. So that is that's basically a really flavorful sort of broth. So you don't want to throw that down the sink. If you're using jarred chickpeas, then usually there will be less liquid than there would be in tins. So if you are using the jars, I'd suggest adding about 150 mils of water on top. So next we add the tomatoes. This is just a regular tin of chopped tomatoes. If you're using whole tin tomatoes, then that's absolutely fine. Just squish them against the side of the pan with your wooden spoon until they've kind of broken down a bit. So once the chickpeas and tomatoes are in, I'm going to turn the heat up to kind of a medium-high heat because we want everything to kind of come together, thicken slightly, and for all those flavors to kind of get to know each other. This is a really quick dish because the chickpeas are cooked already. So we really only need to cook this for about 10 minutes. It's smelling great. So the next thing is the kale. I'm just going to rip in roughly 2 handfuls worth of kale. And we add this now because I really only want to cook the kale for sort of 5-6 minutes so that it still retains some freshness. It's still nice and green. If we'd add it at the beginning, it would have kind of, cooked for a little bit too long. Sometimes I like to cook kale like that, but in this dish, I still like it to keep a little bit of its greenness and bite. You just want to kind of submerge it very slightly in the sauce so that, picks up some of those lovely flavors, but also it cooks. So I'm going to use some harissa here. This is rose harissa, but you could use any type of harissa. Harissa, I think, is one of those incredible ingredients to have in your store cupboard or fridge. A pot like this, well, depending on how quickly you eat it, but a pot like this lasts me a couple of months at home, and it is such an intense sort of chili paste. It's so delicious, and it is a really quick way to kind of add a serious hit of flavour to so many things. So it's something I always have on hand, and I think something I often, drizzle over hummus if we're having a snack, or really often fold through yoghurt when we're topping lots and lots of different kind of dishes. So I'm just going to add a teaspoon in here. I'm just going to kind of ripple that through the yoghurt. So the next thing is just a bit of parsley. These can be kept for stocks and soups and stews later down the line. The stalks aren't too tough, so I just chop the whole lot, stalks and all, and it saves time. So I'm going to give it another minute or so. And this last bit of cooking is where you kind of really need to trust your instincts. If your dish has had the amount of time it says in the recipe, but it doesn't look quite right, it's still too liquidy, or the kale doesn't look like it's cooked, or, there's not enough liquid and, it doesn't feel like a stew, this is when you can stop and adjust and change things. Cook it for a little bit more, add a little bit more liquid, or take it off the heat earlier. Each stove, each pan, each ingredient is going to be completely different. So, the more we cook, the more we hone those instincts, and the more we know kind of when things are how they should be. An important thing to do now is to taste. Tastes really good, but hasn't got anywhere near enough salt for me. I just added some salt at the beginning with the onions, and then the chickpeas are naturally seasoned, so I thought that might be enough. It wasn't, but it's really, I think, important with seasoning, not just to think about the salt you're putting in, but to think about all the different ingredients that are making up your dish, because some of those, if you're using capers or olives, will naturally be salty. So it's not just about the salt you're adding, it's about all the ingredients that are making up that kind of seasoning picture. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper as well. So The salt's getting there, still needs a little bit more. We've got that lovely back note of the preserved lemon. I'm actually now sort of regretting my choice of only adding 1 lemon. I think because these are quite small, I could have done with 2. But there's a way to correct that. I'm actually just going to add a little bit of lemon juice for a bit of extra freshness. So this part is arguably the most, can't say that, arguably. This part is arguably the most important part of the cooking process. It's when you're checking, tweaking, making sure it's all as it should be and super delicious. So a final try. That lemon's made the difference. It's kind of brightened it up. The salt is great. I know I'm going to add a bit of chili with this harissa and a little bit more richness with the tahini. So I think it's all going to come together. And this really is a kind of meal in itself. It's got vegetables, it's got protein, it's got loads and loads of flavour. Flatbreads are really good here because they're great for kind of dipping in and getting all that extra sauce, that yoghurt and harissa we're going to put on top. So this is one of those dishes that's really quick to make, but if you wanted to, you could actually double this up. You know, this is 2 days worth of dinners or dinner and lunch. So there's our braise. I like to top mine with some of this delicious harissa yoghurt, a little bit of parsley, and finally, I think probably one of my favourite ingredients of all time, tahini, which I'm sure all of you know is sesame paste, but this brings like some richness, some butteriness, but also like a sweetness and a very, very gentle bitterness. So it kind of, you know, just brings everything else that's going on together. Even though I'm a chef and a cook and I love the whole process of cooking, you know, what I love the most is when something is really easy, but it tastes outrageously delicious. And this is one of those dishes. Delicious dishes. And that is one of those dishes. We honestly make this, you know, once every couple of weeks. It's one of our, you know, sort of on rotation dinners because we always have the stuff in. It's super easy. Any leftovers can be kept in the fridge or frozen. It's great. Make it. If you were a pulse, what pulse would you be? I think I'd be a butter bean. This is solid stuff, isn't it?
Soft in the middle.
Soft in the middle. Generous.
Yeah, hearty.
Hearty. Delicious.